Won't you come and take me away? I just wanna be with you. Won't you come and take me away? To a place to walk on troubled seas, faith to stand when I don't believe. I just wanna be with you. Won't you come and take me away? I just wanna be with you. Won't you come?
You are now locked into the TruthSeekah podcast, streaming live at TruthSeekah.com, your source for spiritual and inspirational music, teachings, and media. This show is designed to help you grow in your walk with Christ and advance the kingdom of heaven. And now, your host, TruthSeekah.
Yo, what's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls? This is the TruthSeekah podcast. I'm your host, TruthSeekah. Excited, delighted to be with you guys. Finally, man, trying to get this internet situation worked out and trying to roll with the punches. And you know what? Anytime obstacles come your way, hurdles come your way, you just got to roll with it. Got to make it happen. So that's what we're doing. I'm excited to talk with my guest today. We're going to be talking about spirituality, the afterlife, eternity, infinity even. We're going to be talking about a lot of cool stuff. So make sure you guys hang in there and hang out with us. So big shout out to everybody who's already here listening in the chat room, everybody on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, everybody listening live. And shout out to those people who are listening on the podcast apps as well. We love all of you guys. So I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who is supporting my work, who make this show possible. Without your help, I couldn't do this. So I want to say a huge thank you to everybody supporting my work via Patreon. So I'm going to give a shout out to some of the latest patrons we have within the last week or so. Shout out to Harvey Joel. Shout out to you, Harvey. You're awesome, bro. And Paula Fields. Shout out to you too, Paula. Thank you guys for believing in the work and coming on and partnering with me, and everybody else who has been supporting since the beginning. Everything that you guys do to help me take this show and broadcast it to the masses, man. There's a lot of opportunities that I've been presented with here within the last couple days or so. We're talking about joining with another network, broadcasting network, the BBS radio show, and looking to get on with those guys. So we got that going on. Whole bunch of more stuff. We have September the 14th, the Christ Consciousness event that we're putting on, the Christ Consciousness Conference here in Mobile, Alabama. So if anybody is interested in that, all the info is at christ-consciousness.com, or you could just go to truthseekah.com, check it out. I'm going to be speaking, performing. I'm going to be teaching on sound healing, color healing, light healing. Justin Caldwell is going to be performing, doing music. He's going to be leading instrumental healing as well, with the use of the piano, playing prophetically, which he's really talented at. And also my friend Joshua Fluman, aka Gothic Mystic, will be there teaching about dream interpretation and all of that good stuff. So you definitely do not want to miss it. I don't do a lot of live events anymore. So if you want to support and you want to hang out and have dinner with us and all that good stuff, make sure that you guys pick up tickets today, because it's limited seating. TruthSeekah.com, September the 14th, Mobile, Alabama. Christ Consciousness Conference. So if you'd like to support, head on over to patreon.com/TruthSeekah. You get access to my entire discography of music. It's 200 plus songs. You get access to the archives and everything that we've put out, some extra material there, as well as our Thursday night School of the Mystics and Sunday Seer class. So if you're interested in that stuff, go check it out. I've made it worth your while. There's a bunch of stuff over there. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring in today's guest. I'm excited to speak with you, my friend. Paula Lenz. How are you doing, Paula?
Just great. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Oh, well, thank you for working with me as well with the internet issues. We were live. We were ready to go live this morning and set it up. And as soon as, it's so weird because as soon as I'm about to click that live button, the internet would just drop. So, man, but yeah, thank you so much for working with me, and we're gonna have a beautiful discussion. So,
yes.
So, I guess the best place to start is at the beginning. I'm familiar with your story, been doing some research on you, listening to some other interviews and things like that, been all over your website. But to those people who have no idea who you are and what you bring to the table, just kind of go ahead and set the framework for your story and your book, and it'll be awesome.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to point out that this part of my life was not revealed until I did come out with my book in September of 2017. And the experiences and the story of how this all began really started in 1982. It's been, and my brother transitioned in 1983, so it's been 36 years since that happened. And I just want to point out that I'm the oldest child in the family. My brother was 4 years younger than me, and I do have a sister who's 10 years younger. My brother and I were very close. And as I said, this part of my life really was not revealed until recently, but I always had a couple of these friends of mine that I had shared the story with. And for all these years, they continued to tell me, you really need to write your story. You need to write a book. And so when I retired from the main business world, suddenly I decided it was time to do that. So I published my book when I had a precognitive dream warning, which I didn't know at the time I had that dream what it meant, but it was a recurring dream for a year, and it was always the same. I was outside in these expansive fields, and people were gathering there. And as time went on, more and more people got there until there were these crowds. And someone came up to me and asked me what's going on. And I looked at them and I said, I'm not sure, but I've heard that it's the end of the world. And when I said that, I just stood a moment there, and Jesus appeared in the sky. And when Jesus appeared in the sky, I just doubled over almost down to the ground. And I was experiencing the worst pain of my life. But this pain was not physical pain. It was the worst heartfelt suffering and agony that I had ever known. And as I was doubled over, I kept saying, but it isn't supposed to be this way. I thought the end of the world was supposed to be joyous. And then the dream would end, and each and every time I would be startled awake. And I just kept wondering to myself, why am I having this dream? What does it mean? So fast forward a year later to the morning of October the 7th, 1983. And that morning, I'm driving my husband to a meeting and dropping him off. We're going to be meeting later at the Greek festival down in Houston. And as we're driving along, I'm getting ready to drop him off at this meeting, I suddenly developed this really strange, terrible pain over my heart area. And I didn't know what was happening, but I was very frightened by it because I was wondering to myself, am I having a heart attack? Do I have a blood clot? I didn't know what was going on. But I do remember glancing at the clock. It said 9 o'clock in the car, just trying to be sure I got my husband to his meeting on time. And I didn't say anything to my husband. And as we drove along, after about 15 minutes, that pain went away. And I went on to the Greek festival, joined my friends there. And then later on that day, my husband came down to the festival. In the meantime, my friends and I were in the annex area at the Greek Orthodox Church. Most of the festival's outside, but you get food on the inside there. And there were just huge crowds by that time. And I looked out across the crowds and I saw my husband making his way to me. And as he got closer and I saw his face, I knew that something was terribly wrong. I had never seen him look that way before. And as he got close to me. He put his hand on both my arms and he looked me right in the eye and he said, Donnie was killed in an accident today. And as I'm standing there looking him in the eyes, I had this image of the earth in my mind, and I could see this earth just falling, and just crashing down at my feet. And with that, I just doubled over in pain that I had for the last year, was trying to show me, was trying. I just couldn't fathom how I was going to make it through all. In the book I wrote, every moment was sheer agony during those days, with no words to adequately describe a broken heart. Nothing made sense, and everything about life was dark. I barely slept. I moved in a daze. I wanted to die every day. This terrible, impenetrable wall now separated me from ever having contact with my beloved brother again. How do you process that fact and integrate it into your life? I could not. And then at the burial site, I wondered, how could I possibly continue living after this? So I stayed in my hometown the following week to help my parents with some things. And 3 days after my brother's funeral, I decided to take some flowers to my grandparents' house. And as it happened, my husband had left me there, my dad's, and the only access to a vehicle I had was to my brother's personal truck, because my brother was killed in a company truck. So I took his truck and I started driving to my grandparents' house, which is about a 10 or 15-minute drive away. And as I'm driving along, all of a sudden, I developed 360-degree vision. I'm driving, I'm seeing everything around me. And I'm thinking to myself, what is happening to me? And before I could think too long about that, however, I realized that my brother was at my right shoulder as I'm driving. And he still looked like himself, but he was also like a pattern of lights. And he began to speak telepathically to me while I'm still driving. And he told me not to be sad, that he was happy. And most of all, he wanted me to know what life was like for him now. He explained to me that he was on another plane of being, and that it had simply been time for him to leave. Then, when he got through explaining that to me, suddenly I was no longer in my body. I was leaving my body with him, and I existed in this state of consciousness with him. And at first, I saw almost what looked like a landscape that was similar to like a negative of a photograph. But then that kind of faded away. And after that, I realized that I was out in the universe with my brother, and my entire focus became one of experiencing infinity and eternity. And throughout this entire experience now, my brother stayed with me. But the first thing that I experienced while I was in this state of consciousness was a wave of peace that came over me. And I was reminded of the Bible verse, the peace that passes understanding. And it just came over me completely. And the next wave that I had come over me was one of all knowledge. I realized that I knew everything that had ever taken place in the universe, everything about the universe, and that I just knew all knowledge. And then the third wave that came over me was this all-encompassing energy of pure love. And this love was so much more and so much deeper than anything that we experience here on earth as love. It was huge and all caring. And yet I knew that this energy was alive and caring. And that's what I call spirit in my book. And I realized at this point in the experience that all of these things that were happening to me, I was no longer experiencing it as a sense of knowledge of these things. Instead, I actually became one with all of that. I realized that there was absolutely no separation of me from anything in the universe, and that everything and everyone that exists anywhere is a part of this oneness, which is all oneness of this energy of love or spirit. And at that point, I began to realize that, you know what, I am home. This is where I want to be. I don't want to return to my body. I just don't care anything about that. And so I began thinking about the fact that I knew there was another level that I needed to go to or get to so that I would go on and be in infinity and eternity for, forever, and not have to go back to my body. But I started feeling like at that point that I was whooshing away, just whooshing and going really fast upward. But as that began to happen, my brother kind of exerted his energy on me, and he said to me, "No, you can't go yet. It's not your time." And at that point, I began very rapidly to return to my body. I could see myself coming back into my body, and I landed there. It felt like with a thud. And the very first thought I had of this wonderful experience was, wow, I feel so constricted in this body. I'm just, what happened to this feeling of just being one with everything? It was kind of shocking to be back in my body. But I felt at peace. I was very happy. I realized at this point I'd actually made a turn onto another road that led directly to my grandparents' house. And, I was probably out of my body for 4 or 5 minutes. And, I don't know who was driving the truck. I certainly was not cognizant of that. And I got to my grandparents' house, and it was kind of interesting. It was almost as though I could see through my brother's eyes the grief and the sadness, how sad it seemed to him that we were so upset and everything. Because that's how I viewed my grandparents. Now, I didn't say anything to my grandparents about this experience I had. And in fact, I didn't tell anyone about this for a very long time. And even when I did tell someone about this experience I had, it was only to maybe 2 or 3 of my very closest friends. Again, a long time passed before that happened. And, all I can say is that after I had this experience and came back, my consciousness was never the same. I could not view life and even things like religion and all of that. I just couldn't view it the same as I had before. It seemed, I viewed it from all the things that I'd been taught, and it just seemed so enclosed almost, versus this majorly expanded idea that I had now of who we are and how most people don't realize who we are in relation to spirit and and our connection with the energy of love, with spirit. So, I'm going to stop here too a minute and just comment on something, because I've had a lot of people ask me about the fact that other than mentioning Jesus in my dream, I don't really talk about Jesus in the book. I refer, of course, to spirit and consciousness and that sort of thing. And, it's not that I don't believe in Jesus. And I mean, you just mentioned in your promo there, you were talking about the Christ consciousness. And certainly I'm there in terms of the Christ consciousness and understanding what Jesus brought to mankind. But I don't go into that in my book, because I was trying to share with people my story of my sorrow and coming out of that, and how that's been integrated into my life. My goal was not to write a book on religion versus spirituality. I do talk about that, but I just kind of wanted to go ahead and point that out, because I think it's an important point for people to understand. Again, I do talk about, how my views changed about being in the idea of dogma of religion and the rules and regulations that seem to come out of that, versus the idea that we're all on a spiritual path. And, there's just a broader, all-encompassing way that I feel about, all people, versus, oh, my religion's right versus yours. So,
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you understand that idea.
Yeah, that's one of the first things to kind of go out the door, or at least get a new framework when it comes to, the old time religion and what it means for us now, what we've been told. And it's not to throw everything away, but it's just like, get a new framework for it,
Exactly. That's exactly right, what you just stated. So at this juncture, after staying in Bryan for a while, I did return to my life in Houston. And so I began to have a lot of after effects from this being in this state of consciousness that, impacted me personally. But the other thing that began to happen was, not only did my brother reach out to me during this time after his funeral, but once I got home, I began to notice things there. And eventually I figured out, oh, yes, this was my brother continuing to reach out to me. One of the first things that started happening was his best friend and had taken a photograph of he and Donnie just a week before Donnie's accident. And he gave to the whole family copies of that picture, because it was the last photograph ever taken of my brother. So I had that picture in this little frame, and every day, or I don't know how long, when I would come home from work, that picture would be turned down because it was in a little stand-up frame. And I just couldn't understand what was happening with this photograph. And I noticed these other weird things happening in our house. For example, I noticed that there was a chair in our dining room, at the dining room table, that at least 2 or 3 times a week I would come home and this one particular chair would be pulled out. And then, I would put it back under the table. And I thought, well, this is strange. And I asked my husband, have you been coming in here doing anything? He goes, no, hardly ever go in there. And I told him what was happening. And until we sold that house, which was about 6 years later, that continued to happen every week. Another time, my husband and I were in our TV room there, watching TV, and there were some bookcases in there. And all of a sudden, out of the top shelf, this video comes flying out. Not just, being at the edge of the shelf and falling down straight to the floor. This came flying out and landed at our feet. And we both looked at each other in shock, like, how did this just happen? Again, not really realizing this is probably my brother. We were just like kind of dumbfounded by all these things that happened. Another time when I came home from work, I was getting ready to walk into our master bedroom, and I just stopped dead in my tracks because there was a chair that was put right in the doorway of going into the master bedroom. Now, this chair was supposed to be under a desk in that bedroom. And I just couldn't understand what was this chair doing there. In fact, I actually thought someone was in the house or something and ran out the front door and waited out there for a while, and then nothing happened. And I went back in. And sometimes when I would lie down to take a nap, like on the weekends, I would close my eyes. And as soon as I would close my eyes, I would feel someone sitting down on the bed, and my eyes would just fly open. And of course, no one was there. But all of these things, there were many other things that happened. In fact, my dad and his wife talked about how at night they could hear the microwave buttons being pushed, making a little sound. And they were sure that it was my brother Donnie, because he used to come over there, and help himself to food and, that kind of thing. And they said, that would happen all the time. And my mom, she actually had a dream about my brother not long after his passing. And in this dream, my brother came to her in the form of a young deer. She told me, she said, as soon as she saw this deer, she knew that it was Donnie. And he came up to her, and she said to him, son, you need to come back to me right now. I need you here. And he looked at her and he said, Mama, I can't come back. I'm happy now. And she said, son, I need you. I need you to come back right now. And he said, I can't, Mama. And he turned and walked away out of the dream from her. But she said that what happened from that was when he walked away, he took out of her heart the deepest, worst of her sorrow in her. And she knew the next day that had happened, because she said, if that hadn't happened, if he hadn't taken this terrible sorrow away from me, I just don't know if I could have lived. So, it wasn't just me he originally reached out to. I think he was just wanting to let us know, hey, I'm still here, I'm alive, I'm just, on the other side. And, but I've continued for the rest of my life to have outreach by him. Some of that involved turning down photos. Just one time there was some of these signs that he gave me were trying to warn me of when I was going to have problems coming up in my life. One of those that happened was, I still have these little brass Siamese cats that he had given me for Christmas one year. And sometimes those cats would be turned in opposite directions. And if he had moved around these Siamese cats, then I was on the lookout for perhaps some issues coming into my life. And there were other things that he moved around that were out of the norm. And again, it was kind of like he was trying to give me a heads up about perhaps some issues coming up in my life. But maybe, the most astonishing thing I had happen was just a couple of months after my brother passed. We had gone back at Christmas time to my dad's house. My wife had become sick, and then my dad soon began to get sick. And so we thought, well, we'll just continue to stay here, because we were there for a couple of days for Christmas from Houston. And then that night, my husband and I began getting sick, and it was it was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. My husband tried to get out of bed and he fell on the floor. He could barely get back into the bed. And I was experiencing like my heart was pounding so hard. I just thought it was going to come out of my chest. Anyway, long story short on that, I ended up crawling on the floor and opening the front door. And I had called my sister to come over. And when she got there, I told her, and I was kind of half out of my mind when I was telling her this. I said, there's something wrong in this house. There's just something wrong in this house. I don't know what it is, but there's something wrong in this house. And I made her open the kitchen window so that all night, I mean, I stayed by the open front door all night on the carpet. She did stay on the couch and stay with me. But I made her keep the door open and the window open. And the next morning when my dad finally got up, I was still in there on the floor. And the first thing I said to him was, Daddy, there's something wrong with this house. There's something wrong in this house. And that's all I could tell him. I just continued to get this message. And at that point, he finally decided to check out the furnace for the house. And sure enough, the door on the front of the furnace in this other room area had fallen off. And so we were all experiencing carbon monoxide poisoning.
Wow.
And of course, my dad fixed that. But had I not had this message come through to me, now I didn't know anything about carbon monoxide poisoning. It was not anything I paid any attention to. I was only 30 at the time. That kind of stuff was like, well, whatever. It always happens to somebody else. And I had absolutely no idea. But that was a message that came through very strongly. And I credit that to my brother, that he knew that something was wrong there. So, I've had a lot of varying experiences like this throughout the rest of my life. And, I'm 66 now, so this has been going on for a long time. But I did mention, too, that I had other kinds of after effects. For example, in the beginning, when people would walk into the room, I could hear what they were thinking. Now that eventually went away. Sometimes even now though, I still know what people are thinking or what they're getting. As I drove past lights on the freeway, they would go out. Or if I were walking on a street in the evening, I'd come to a street lamp and it would go out. And then when I would go past it, it would come back on. And that still happens even now. And that's an impact that people who have had near-death experiences have had. And as years went on, too, I developed greater intuition. Just like it was almost intuition or something telling me about the carbon monoxide poisoning. That's how other messages began to come through to me about varying things, whether it had to do with things at work or at home, or even changing careers. And then I also learned to read auras. And I have one story about that, which is probably the most phenomenal story I have in relation to seeing people's auras. And that was at one of the jobs I worked at. I had two people who worked for me. And one day I told them, I said, well, I can read your auras. Are you interested in that? And they were like, oh, wow. Yeah. Tell me, what does my aura look like? And so I told the guy who worked for me that his aura looked really great. It was bright yellow, bright yellow color. And I said, that means everything's really great and you're doing well. And then the woman who worked for me, when I looked at her aura, I couldn't believe it because I'd never seen anybody's aura look like that. It was really muddy. It was kind of a muddy, almost kind of a greenish yellow or something. And it wasn't clear. And I just looked at her and she's like, well, what's the matter? And I said, well, I've just never seen an aura like this. But to myself, I was thinking, well, this can't be good because it's just so murky and not clear. But I told her that, and I just said, well, maybe it's just some energy blockage today or something. I'm not sure. Well, 10 days after that, she ended up being in intensive care for 10 days. And eventually, of course, she came back to work when she got over that. But she decided to do something about having her energy cleared. And when she came back to work that day from having gone to this practitioner, I said, well, tell me how that went. Come in my office and sit down. So she did. Well, as soon as she sat down, to this day, this is the most phenomenal thing I've actually seen. And that is that this huge, completely non-transparent, most of the auras I see are transparent. This was a non-transparent aura, and it was purple, and it was at least, like 2 feet encompassing her all around, this purple aura. And she's sitting there, and all of a sudden this has happened, and she starts talking to me, and I'm sitting there dumbfounded seeing this, because I wasn't even trying to see her aura. It just appeared all of a sudden. And when she began speaking to me, my eyes began to uncontrollably water, just like I was weeping, just uncontrollably. And she's sitting there looking at me, and I'm like, I don't know what's happening, Sue, but I have to tell you what I'm seeing. Not only when you're speaking am I reacting this way with my eyes, but you've got this gigantic purple aura around you. And anyway, she couldn't continue talking to me because I was just weeping uncontrollably. So I said, look, why don't you go to your office, call me from there, finish telling me what's happening. So she did. She went to her office, she called me. As soon as she walks away, all this eye weeping stops. But as soon as she calls me and I pick up the phone and she starts talking, it starts happening all over again. And what happened was, of course, I didn't know this on that day, but this woman became a very gifted healer. And this day, after she'd had these blockages, energy blockages cleared somehow, this is when she was coming into these God-given powers. I mean, the spiritual energy that was flowing into her. And after that, she became a Reiki master and practitioner. And she still does that today. She's very gifted. But that was one of the more singular events that I've had happen.
Yeah.
Never seen anything like that again.
Wow. That's awesome. That's beautiful. Man, I've got so many questions for you, and you've got more stories, right? Man.
Well, ask away. I can
sure.
take a breath here.
Heck yeah. Well, we're going to go to a quick break, but like I said, I've got a bunch of questions when we get back on the other side of the break. So many questions here. I'm excited to ask them to you here shortly. So stick with us, guys. We got a quick commercial we're going to play. We'll be right back. So the Encountering Jesus, the Hem of His Garment meditation, man, if you guys are familiar with the story in the Bible with the woman with the issue of blood, you're pretty much coming at it from her perspective. So you're translated back to ancient Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, and you're walking through the streets. Now, there's ambiance, we have voice actors and all of these things as you're encountering people walking through the streets. And as you're moving through the crowded streets, there's things on the left and on the right. They're trying to get your attention. There's vendors trying to sell you things. There's groups of ladies that you meet who are trying to pull you off the road. They're trying to gossip about you. You see all of this stuff going on, but you see Jesus straight ahead. And you're just trying to focus on Jesus with all of these different distractions that are coming. And the different distractions that I put in there were something that God translated to me that people were dealing with. And some of it was stuff that I have conquered in my own life that I was able just to kind of start rolling with it when the Lord told me to go there. But it's dealing with gossip. It's dealing with slander, backbiting, inconsistency, and getting pulled off the path. So as you're going through the meditation, you're being ministered to for some of these areas in your life that we've all struggled with. So again, you're pushing further. You see Jesus ahead of you, and you just know that all you got to do is get close to him. Everybody's fighting for his attention, and you just know you just got to get close enough just to say hello. Just close enough. If he can see me, I just got to touch him. And so you go in, and I don't want to give it away, but you go in and you encounter the love of Christ. You encounter Jesus. He ministers to you, and it's just this beautiful encounter that you have. And it's about 16 minutes, but as you have this encounter, I've also created these meditations so that you can just kind of keep going. As you go in, you're already deep into the trance state. You can kind of keep going with the encounter. So the music continues to go for an hour. So there's testimonies about people who are going in and they're encountering Jesus, they're encountering God, they're encountering angels, and really just getting downloads from the Father's heart for themselves. So I urge you to check it out. The Encountering Jesus, the Hem of His Garment meditation, and I guarantee that you'll be blessed from checking it out.
A new sound is springing forth. Join us for the Christ Consciousness Conference in Mobile, Alabama with TruthSeekah. Justin Caldwell and Gothic Mystic, September the 14th at 6 p.m. at the Mobile Center for Spiritual Living. Musical performances, teaching and lectures, sound and color healing, activation and impartation, meditation and trance, dream interpretation and symbolism. A time of refreshing, prayer, meditation, teaching, and activation. All are welcome to attend regardless of religious affiliation or spiritual background to encounter the presence of God in a deeper way.
Get tickets and register today at christ-consciousness.com. We look forward to seeing you there. All right, we're back. Man, I'm excited about that conference coming up. It's going to be good. And also concerning the meditations, I just put out a new one last night. Just did the Heavenly Father, Mother Earth guided meditation. And the meditations that I do are a little bit different because I hire voice actors to play parts and roles of different characters in there. And then there's sound effects. And you go to heaven, you meet Father God, gives you a hug, embraces you, and gives you a word. And then you go back to your body and you go down into the earth, deep into the depths of the bedrock of the earth. And you hear the sound effects of dirt rumbling and boulders moving as you're going through, and you encounter the mother. So make sure y'all check that stuff out. I put a lot of work into that. So just the meditations and the Christ Consciousness Conference, TruthSeekah.com. Make sure y'all check it out. I've got too many questions. I'll let you share. I'll let you share too much without asking questions, and now I'm overwhelmed with questions.
It's good. It's good. I can just stop and you can ask me questions.
Okay, here we go. First question. Let's just start here. So, talking about being able to hear your brother speak telepathically, does he still speak to you telepathically, or is it by these other means that you've been talking about, or do you hear that voice in your inner ear of the still small voice speaking to you, or even showing up to you in the dream state and things like that? Still, how has that evolved?
You know, for the most part, I've always relied on the things that he moves around or does, but I have to tell you that really in the recently, I have actually been able to hear him and connect with him in a way where, you know, he just speaks to me and he'll say something. But that being said, he's still around, and sometimes, I don't know, this last event I had, I think he was just trying to play a trick on me. Normally when all these photos that I've talked about that have been moved around and so forth, you know, I was in my office and just very quiet. So whenever these photos have been moved, I've not been around to see that happen. But I was sitting quietly in my computer, and all of a sudden, in the bookcase where I keep a lot of these photos, some are framed, some are not. And this one frame photo fell down from the back part of the bookcase and hit another one at the front, and it flew out, and I jumped about a foot out of my seat. I got up and I went over there and I said to the bookcase, Donnie, I know you're here. And it just kind of scared me. But I do hear from him now, unlike I have in years past. So that's kind of a new development for me. I think I just took more time to focus on that aspect instead of being so focused on, oh, what's he doing now,
Yeah. So as far as hearing his voice and interacting with him in different areas, moving things and trying to warn you, give you premonitions, and even stepping in and out of the dream state and stuff like that, are you guys encountering any other entities? Any other departed spirits or angels or anything like that? Like, is your ear sharpening up and having those encounters as well? Or is it this kind of song and dance with your brother that's going on?
I am very aware of my guides and angels. And I do get intuitions and premonitions, and sometimes actually, I get visions of potentially things that are coming up. But that does not come from my brother. That comes, I'm sure, from spirit or my angels or guides that are around me, either to warn me, although most of that is not warning. Well, I guess some of it could be considered that, just trying to let me know, hey, you need to be aware of this and you need to be prepared for this. But I have not encountered any other spirits or entities like my brother.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I feel like I'm surrounded by ghosts because I don't feel like that at all.
Some people are. I was gonna ask you. I mean, just early on when you were talking about getting that sense of fear coming upon you and having this urgency. And then you had the sign that the carbon monoxide was coming through. So I was like, hold on, I don't know if there's like this strong sense of fear, because a lot of times spirits bring upon an essence with them, and whether it is a spirit of fear or peace or whatever the case is, when that person is around, it's like you're talking about the auric field. It's their vibration, and that color resonates at what type of things they're doing in life or in the afterlife. People have them, spirits have them. You can feel it. You get used to it and you get trained. So I didn't know if there's spirits that come and you just automatically get scared. You get paranoid, and it's nothing you've done. It's just what's kind of going on in the ethers and stuff. So I didn't know if you were feeling some of that as well or anything. So,
well, I have to say, I do try to I ask for the light of protection around me. I do have to be cognizant of that when I'm, at a conference or around a lot of people. It's just a good thing to do every day, just because I can be sensitive to other energies around me. But I've never really felt like, again, that I've had a lot of run-ins with a lot of other spirits,
Yeah.
other than the ones I'm familiar with, my guides and my angels and spirit and Christ.
Yeah, I think it's a valid question, because I feel like a lot of times once any other spirit knows that you're open to communication, they're like, hey, we got some things we want to show you too. Whether it's somebody else's brother or sibling who passed or whatever the case is, she can hear us, and she's looking. So you got to be careful, so it's good. I didn't know, that could be very overwhelming when you have those awakenings. And honestly, it leads to a lot of schizophrenia, with people who are in the spiritual community, and they're just an open vessel for any type of entity that wants to come through, and they're just kind of playing with them. So definitely something to talk about. There's a question
Yes.
here. Go ahead if you have something for that.
Well, I was just going to say that, my friend that I talked about whose purple aura I saw and she became a healer, um, once she became a Reiki healer, and, she's just a very high level uh, person in terms of the sensitivity area. And so from the beginning, she has really taught me about that and made sure that I'm aware, that I need to protect myself from a lot of the, additional outside
Yeah.
energy. So I'm totally on board with what you're saying.
Yeah, that's good. You definitely have to do the spiritual offense and defense as well. You have to kind
Yeah.
of defend yourself and be aware of who you are, right? And not get lost in the midst of all of this kind of communication and chaos and things like that out there in the ether. So, one of the questions we have here is from Rab, and he wants me to ask you if you sense colors. I don't know what this means, but colors from behind buildings and places. I don't know if that's like concerning the auras but it says from behind buildings and places. I'm not sure.
I've not sensed colors, but there are times when I walk into certain kinds of facilities and I do feel the energy. Here's a very good example of that. Um, there's a place up here in Colorado, the uh, Shambhala Mountain Retreat area, and they have there a stupa, which I didn't even know what a stupa was till I went to this place. And it's a temple that you walk into, and Buddha, it's got the biggest statue of Buddha I've ever seen in my life. It's from literally floor to ceiling. And so I had gone there, to check it out. The place there is absolutely gorgeous in the mountains. And when I walked inside there, I was taking a look around. There were a few other people in there, and people do come in there to pray, sit on cushions and pray or meditate. But when I walked in there, and I had been there just about 30 seconds, I just felt from the floor rising upward. I felt this immense, powerful energy just rising from the floor all the way to the ceiling. And I went, wow, this is a very powerful place. That was probably the the most outstanding example of something related to a building that I've ever felt.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was just palpable to me.
Yeah.
So I am able to sense energies like that. That one by far was the most memorable one that I have.
Yeah.
But colors and things, I can't say I've really seen any colors affiliated with any particular buildings.
Okay. Well, I guess one of the things I'm really interested in is the fact that, well, let's kind of preface it a little bit like this. The spiritual awakening you had, it feels like a near-death experience, but you didn't. There was nothing that there was no near-death about it, right? You were maybe just translated or transported into another realm. I've talked to people on here who talk about having like a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, like out of the blue, just have this spiritual awakening. A lot of people go through a lot of trauma. Do you think that something may have triggered it? Like you said, just riding in your brother's vehicle, were there a lot of emotions there? Were you thinking about him as you were driving in the truck or whatever the case is?
Well, actually, in driving the truck that day, it was one of the few moments while I was in my hometown and being there where my mind was almost like in neutral. I got in the truck, I was driving, and I was just kind of in the moment. I wasn't really going over everything. I wasn't thinking about a lot of stuff. I probably was at a point almost where I had been full of so much emotion and everything that these moments in the truck and going to my grandparents and thinking about that, I just was more in a neutral state of mind. And I actually think that enabled me to actually have this experience, because when you're so covered up with grief or whatever's going on in your mind, it's almost like blocking it. But in that instance, I think it was simply because I was a little more neutral. I wasn't in the midst of crying that day. I mean, I cried, it felt like continuously for about 4 days straight. So yeah, I think it was an easy opening perhaps for my brother to come through on that. Now, let me comment on your near-death experience information. In my book, the very last chapter, there's an afterward chapter, and it's written by Dr. Janice Holden. And she is a fairly renowned near-death experience researcher. And I had talked to her. I was actually trying to get in touch with Dr. Kenneth Ring because I read his book in 1985 called Heading Toward Omega. And it actually had included one experience in there that was somewhat similar to mine, not exactly the same. But anyway, she and I got to talking. In fact, I called her out of the blue, this professor, and you can't, in my mind, it's like, well, you can't ever really reach professors first off, but she actually answered the phone. And she and I ended up talking for an hour and a half. When she asked me why I was trying to get in touch with Dr. Ring, and she told me, she said, your experience is so much more like a near-death experience, and yet you were not near death. And she said, she offered on the spot to write this last chapter, because she said, I can provide research and tests that have been done that will actually rate where you are on the NDE scale. And so she did. She wrote the last chapter to talk all about the research and pointed out how all these things that I had was so much more like a near-death experience. And yet I had just this out-of-body experience. I say just. But so, yeah, it's a very unusual experience in that regard, because I came back with so many after effects. Even though I don't feel like I, of course, got to the next level of, of where you're closer to death, or even, at death's door. I don't feel like I was that deep into it, because I wanted to go on to the next step where I would be at that when I was out of body. But the research on that is pretty interesting. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because yeah, a lot of those things are very similar.
Yeah, it's very interesting, but it's about the fruit that is produced from it, right? You become spiritually aware, you reach a heightened state of consciousness that you really can't go back to living the same way that you were. Like you said, you looked at religion different, you looked at people different, money, like everything is different now, eternity, death, all of that stuff. And you have to kind of get that framework down again, okay, and kind of almost, evaluate everything in your life that you believed. And it's hard because it's all kind of new stuff. Who are you going to talk to about, you said you was in a state where you knew everything, like all at once. You were just one with everything. You're okay with everything. And that experience, and then that bliss that comes with that, and then go into this place to where you feel universal love and acceptance, not for one group of people or not just for Christians, but for everyone. Like this love that's communicated with you that, hey, my child, everything's okay, and you're right where you're supposed to be. He's where he's supposed to be, and all of this stuff. And you're just sitting in that oneness of just perfect love, like you said, perfect peace. And my question for you is, since you've been there, now you know how to get back there. Is that something is there an inward knowing? That's part of it too. Like once you walk at a higher state of consciousness, you know about that love. You carry it with you everywhere you go. Everything that you do, it's embedded in what you're doing. But is there like a spiritual practice through prayer and meditation or listening to music? Is there a place that you go to kind of channel in that love and feel it again? Because, I mean, even knowing it consciously that you're loved and you're one with all things and all sentient beings and we are one, there's a difference to feeling it. So you were able to feel it, right, when you were in that state? There's a difference
Yes.
of knowing you love it and actually feeling it, not emotionally, but even tangibly feeling love, universal love all over your body down to your core, cleansing you out. That's an awakening. That's being born again. Like, there's so many names for that. Is that something that you revisit often, or do you just kind of live in that state?
Well, you've made so many good points about exactly the way it is when all this happens. And, you know, in my book, I talk about toward the end how many times what I like to do is like to go out. I like to be outside a lot in nature, bike riding, hiking, just a lot of things like that. And for me, when I'm outside, I've kind of developed this technique, which I talk about in the book. It's called meld into spirit technique. I call it mist. And
Wow, I like that. You made that up? That's awesome.
yes, or perhaps I received that
Yeah,
information.
both.
um, but I determined that what I was doing was, being away from people and having some time to be out in nature or whatever, that I could revisit that feeling of how it was to not be confined by a body and to actually be one with everything. So what I do in this technique, this meld into spirit technique, is to imagine and feel as though my body and you know that the body itself, that I'm just, the edges of who I am are just kind of blurring and becoming particle like, and and then I imagine everything around me becoming like particles of light, and then the whole earth becoming particles of light, and then the universe. And when you can see and imagine and then feel that, this body that you're seeing now has actually become these particles of light that are all part of everything that you're imagining, and try to feel that. And the first hint that you have that you're getting that is because my heart chakra, when I start into this, becomes very big and warm. And that's when I know I've connected with the love of spirit. And that enables me to continue this process of melding into that love and that sense of spirit, and trying to get a different vision in my mind of who I am in relation to the universe. And that's why I go with these particles of light and everything becoming that, because then it's all the same and we're all part of that same fabric. And that works for me. Of course, I do sit and sometimes just close my eyes and just connect with spirit. Again, it's always from the heart, because that's that heart center area, the chakra area. That's where it all starts. Um, and so, of course, I do that from time to time, but it's not like I live in that framework all the time, because, of course, I'm here in body and I'm, doing things, but I do try to be a lot more cognizant of when I look at people and others and places,
Hmm.
uh, of thinking of them like, we're all one in spite of what everybody thinks. We're at the basic core of who we are. We're all one. And I think about that consciously sometimes, but it's not so much about thinking about it as it is bringing forth the love from the heart, and and just kind of letting go of a lot of that thinking all the time about everything.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. And actually, I'm right now I'm making quite a few notes in relation to meld into spirit technique, because especially recently, in the last month and a half, I've had a lot of people who have mentioned to me how they absolutely love this technique, this meld into spirit technique. And after the book first came out, no one ever mentioned it to me. And I thought, well, maybe people don't like that idea. But now all of a sudden, it's like I'm getting affirmation. These people are all starting to talk about it to me. And so I'm developing ideas to further be able to help people get that. And I'm hoping to do, you know, a workshop to some degree on that to help, I don't know, educate, but to help help people get into that sense of
Yeah.
how they can get to that point.
Yeah. Yeah, we always talk about how, these encounters, there's like a lot of times we see them as just one-time events, and we have a bunch. Like the more you're conscious and you're engaging those type of realms and you're open to bigger possibilities, it becomes like an everyday thing where you're having these type of encounters, whether it's angels or fairies or whatever the case is. You just open up to it. But once you've been there, you know how to get back there, right? And you can take people with you to have similar encounters, to feel that love. I say, okay, guys, just trust me. This is what we're going to do. This encounter so you have to go there consciously, remember what it felt like, be in that moment and say, okay, this is how you do it. And bring them back there with you so they can have that same encounter, and it just changes people's lives. And so to really kind of pay it forward, that spiritual awakening that you had, for those people who are looking for it, okay, this is what I did, and if you want to, we can facilitate it. And spirit just meets people where they are, right, in their walk. But if the person's open to it and they're ready, man, they'll have a life-changing encounter just like you did, of being able to take them back there to that place. One thing I want to ask you, and I'm going to use the terminology from a friend of mine who's in chat here. Chris Garner loves this term. But you go into this place of all-knowing, and you just know everything. You're one with everything. He calls it, a lot of people call it, but he always brings up the Akashic records, right? You've accessed the Akashic records of almost like the spiritual library of Alexandria or of time and space that just records everything. Have you done any studying on that? Does that sound familiar? There's something you that you may have accessed in those realms?
The idea about that, I think is a good basis, perhaps, of what I did access there. But to answer your question, I've never really read much, if anything, about the Akashic records. Perhaps it's time for me to get a book or two on that and delve into that. Not that I haven't read some things here and there, I have, but I don't know. Perhaps that was what I was accessing. You have to understand too. After I had this experience in 1983, I absolutely was compelled to read books, everything I could get my hands on about spirituality and or religion, or all things related to consciousness and so forth. And so through the years, I've read just hundreds and hundreds of books. I mean, literally. And so of course I've come across information on that as well. But it is something I have an interest in. And again, as I said, perhaps I should look into that aspect more. I've not really studied much on that.
Yeah. Me neither. I just know enough to get myself in trouble and ask the questions now.
Probably me too. The other comment I have about that, in terms of the reading, being compelled to read on spirituality, you have to understand, I was an English major in college. That's what I got my degree in. So all through my life, I was very interested in reading and books and, all this sort of thing. And so as an English major, I read and studied a lot of fictional work, Of course, there were some nonfiction, but it seems to me, I recall, the most of it was focused on fiction. Well, once I had this experience and, I had this compulsion to read books, which I still read like that, but I could never read fiction again. To
Yeah.
this day,
Yeah.
since I had that experience, I've never read anything fictional again. And here's the other weird thing. I was talking to this other interviewer, Lisa, and she had an experience. And when I told her about that, she was amazed because she'd never heard anybody else voice that. And she said she had that exact same happen to her. So we were both amazed at
Yeah.
that.
I think I'm with you too, man, when you say that. But I'll say this though. I was gonna say I can read fiction that's allegorical, right? About telling you deeper meanings and stuff. But maybe all of it's, in a sense, allegorical when you read it. Because when you're reading it, once you're awakened and you're at a different level of consciousness, you look at things differently. Even the material you're reading, the movies you're watching on TV, like you're seeing hidden meanings and signs and symbols. Like you've been to this place where all creation comes out of and where we're going back to. So everything's different, So whether you're reading a book, and I could throw out some of this spiritual stuff would be like, The Alchemist or whatever. That's a beautiful book about your life and fulfilling your dreams, purpose, and your destiny, and recapturing it. But it's told in as the story of you're following a young man on his journey, following his dream. But the book really is about you recapturing your dream. So many other books you look at, or movies, and we talk about Star Wars and The Matrix, and we had these deeper meanings, but just everything's different. So for me, I don't have the need to because it takes a long time for me to read a book anyway. So just to grab a book that's not going to be slam packed with just spirituality in it. But anything that I watch, I have my third eye's opened as I'm reading or watching it,
And I understand that, sometimes, especially if I'm seeing on TV or something, an especially violent kind of show, I just look at that and I just look at things from a different perspective. It's like, just like even in my book, I talked about how, even looking at things like the religious wars that were held throughout these centuries, and I said, how many wars have been conducted in the name of God? It's like, really?
Yeah.
And, it's, so I look at some of these things that are so violent, and I look at it from the perspective of why does mankind do this to each other? So yeah, I have some viewpoints on some of these things, whereas before I just go, oh well, whatever.
Yeah.
But I look at it differently from a different perspective.
Yeah. That's interesting you say that, because like some of the more like spiritual Muslims who practice Islam, they would see like spiritual wars and the whole term of jihad, this war. It's not the war against the world, but it's the war against the world within. It's a spiritual battle within, and conquering your own demons and declaring war over the Holy Land, which is your body, which all the holy books say that, So even on their aspect, there's like a spiritual way of what this text is really talking about. And for me, when I go back and read the Old Testament and read the scriptures, it's straight allegory about overcoming these other nations. And when you look up what those nations mean, like their Hebraic words or whatever the terms, and it usually has something to do with the psyche and dealing with your own spiritual journey. Once you're illuminated, like you're on this path, it's not about reading about this man who lived 6,000 years ago, however long, named King David, and he's fighting a giant. No, it's about you today fighting your giants and your idols that present themselves to you and stuff like that. So you're able to see the deeper meaning in the allegory that the regular, lay people, they can't even understand it. They're trying to find King David's slingshot where he killed Goliath, or they're trying to find Goliath's armor, and that proves that these stories existed or whatever the case is. But like, once you have that spiritual eye, you can really understand. I think Jesus was telling people, like, this is why I'm speaking in parables. It's not for everyone to understand, but for you it is given to understand the mysteries of the kingdom. And I really do believe in encounter and firsthand experience. And it sounds like what you've experienced. You've been to the other side. You've been to where we go when we pass, right? And it changes everything. It's hard to articulate that and bring it back into focus. But speaking about, the violence and stuff like that and the imagery and stuff, I want to ask you about your dream as well, because you were having this reoccurring dream about the end of the world, right? So I come out of a Christian realm as well, and you have so many people having dreams about the end of the world. And they're writing books on it, and they've been given dates and times, and those dates and times come and nothing happens. And God is speaking to them about the destruction of the world. And we used to see so much stuff like this, but I once heard David Wilcox share. He said, when you're having these dreams about the end of the world and these apocalyptic messages, it's not the end of the world. It's the end of your world, or the world as you know it. It's the end of your own world coming to an end or having a drastic change. Would you say that would be the case with your revelation, that you were having this repetitive dream?
Absolutely. I love the way you capture all these ideas, so succinctly, and you're right on with what you're saying. And yeah, the end of the world, of course, in the dream, of course, Jesus appeared, and so it appeared to be related to, my religious training or whatever.
Yeah.
But of course, in the end, as you say, it was the end of the world for me and my family and our way of being completely, and it was completely shattered. It was over. We could never have again the kind of family, you know, interaction that we had before. I mean, that was completely over. And for me, I guess having had the kind of experience that I had with my brother, that was even a greater uh, uh, understanding of how much my world was ending. That I could never look at life or how we live or anything the same. There were just so many things in my psyche and consciousness that were totally changed completely. I just couldn't go back.
Yeah.
And so there were many aspects that came into play with that end of the world. As I said, my family, I talk about in my book how, my brother was the center of our family, even though I was the oldest, he was 4 years younger, as I said, but he was so funny and he was really smart. He was a great guy. He had a lot of friends. He helped out people. He was just an all-around great guy. And so our family dynamics were always around him because he would start being funny and imitating people and doing all these things. And we would be laughing. And I mean, even when I was in my 20s and I was already married, my brother and I would get on the floor and we'd start wrestling around like we did when we were kids, just because we thought it was funny. I mean, we'd get, and then we'd start yelling for daddy, 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 come stop, make him stop. And, just kind of reverting back. But it was all huge fun and love. And man, when he left, that never happened again. I mean, the spark, the center, all of that was gone. And so, yeah, on many levels, it was the end of the world for me and my family. And the fact that, he went elsewhere.
Yeah. How long were you having that dream before it happened? Like, how was this, like, since you was a child, or how many years?
No, I had that dream. It started in the fall the year before, so I had it for a year. But I didn't mention here that my sister, 2 years before my brother's death, she had a dream which actually showed her how she found out about his death that day. Now, she was afraid that she had that dream probably 2 or 3 months before he was graduating from A&M. And she was afraid he was going to have some kind of accident before he graduated from college there. But she never told anybody about it. And when nothing happened, well, she just kind of blew it off and thought, oh, well, it was just a dream. But in the end, 2 years later, I mean, the way she dreamed it, and she even heard on the phone in her dream, oh, didn't you hear your brother got killed today? I mean, that's how my sister found out. It wasn't from any of our family members or anything. And so that whole dream came true. And, I think to myself, sometimes I feel like we have these dreams. I don't know if spirit leads us to have those dreams, or in some ways I believe that the person's soul knows that this is coming. And perhaps people who you love and are around you and they're used to your energy, that there becomes something that you start giving off about, death coming up or something. And that somehow gets translated to people around you. And I believe that's, in my viewpoint, I think that's why people, they're sensitive already to this person's energy. And I think it starts coming through their energy, what's coming up for them. And then you are picking up on that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, what happened.
Yeah. And even your own too, right? When you're having these dreams about yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, the dream state just in and of itself is just, man, just to try to understand it. Like, part of me is like, that's the real life. Like, that's reality, and
Yes.
the awakened state is something different. Like,
Well,
concerning, go ahead.
If people really understood that, they'd pay a lot more attention to their dreams, because I can tell you that many times when I look at dreams that I have and I think about the particular elements that are in those dreams and what those may be trying to tell me about, many times those turn out to be dreams that are telling me what's coming up.
Yeah.
But I think lots of people can do that. I just think people don't know how to interpret it or understand that they are being shown something.
Right. In the scriptures, like, that's like the number one way that God would speak to people was in their dreams. Cause like we kind of got good at running from the voice of spirit speaking to us during the day, doing our own thing, getting infatuated with the things of the world or whatever the case is. But we all have to put our heads on our pillow at night, no matter what we're doing. And so that's the place. It's like, you're running from me throughout the day, but I got you now. I got some things I want to show you. And you have nightmares and night terrors and things that you've done that you've been trying to suppress during the day. But when you close your eyes, you just keep going back there. So a lot of the things for me of in my dreams, like, now that I'm conscious of it, I pay attention to it like crazy, and I know I can tell the seasons and things that I'm in, or things conflict that I need to deal with, in my life, or people that I need to forgive or need to get out of my life, or maybe a direction that I'm headed that's probably not going to end well. I need to nip it in the bud. All of these different through signs and symbols, in your dreams and stuff like that. Like I said, for you, it was Jesus showing up. Obviously, for the Muslim, it wouldn't have been Jesus. It would have been Muhammad, or the Buddhist would have had a different sign and symbol. We had a dream specialist on here one day, Lainey Dolphin. She was amazing. And it's like different things for different people, because there's different things that you're scared of, right? So for spirit or your mind or whatever it is that communicates fear to you, you might not be scared of spiders, right? So you may be scared of because of trauma, falling off your bike a lot. Maybe you fell off your bike, and it's something that brings back painful, fearful memories. So for you, you may have this reoccurring dream of that, while somebody else has had dreaming about spiders and all these other things, but all still getting the same message across, right? The same idea that you need to be prepared and don't be afraid of the spiders or falling off the bike or whatever, just allowing you to conquer your own obstacles in life, right?
Right. And for sure, I've had many dreams that do foretell for me what's coming up next through different symbols, different images.
Yeah.
And I'm fairly adept at, for the most part, interpreting those things and understanding, okay, well, this is what's coming up for me. You know, I may not know the specifics, but it does give me a sense of, you know, what's happening, what's going to be happening. And so that's happened for many years, long time. But people do need to be attuned to their dreams. They don't again, I don't think they get that, you know, this can be telling you about what's coming up.
Yeah. Paul, I got 2 more questions for you I want to explore really quick, and I'll let you go. I've really enjoyed our talk. But I want to ask you about why did you write the book? Like, what changed in your life? Like, the seasons that, like, why was it okay to go ahead and write this stuff, to get it out? Was there something that changed? Was there in your life that was going on that you felt like, I need to go ahead and get this out after all these years?
Well, number one, I retired, and I had a very full career my whole life, more than 40 years, and so I was really busy and engaged and loved what I was doing, and but you know, of course, I always had this other side to my life going on, which you know, other than 1 or 2 people who from the beginning, you know, I talked to about, no one ever knew this other side of my life in terms of all these things with my brother and everything. And I guess part of that was I didn't want people to think I was crazy, or in the beginning that I was, you know, just depressed and imagining these things or whatever. And so I just kept to myself this other side of my life, all these things going on, you know, with my brother, and my knowing about a lot of things, and, you know, visions and so forth, and intuitive guidance that I was receiving. But when I retired, and it wasn't even that I thought at the time I retired that I would write a book about this, but it's one of those things that after three or 4 months of being retired, I suddenly started getting the message. You know, this guidance suddenly was like, you know what? I need to write this book. I need to write it. And I knew that it was time for me to share my story now. So it was one of those intuitive messages. And I just knew it was time. And once I started writing it, I knew I was doing the right thing. And I really wanted to share my story to help people, because every day people lose loved ones suddenly and tragically. And I know what they go through and what they have coming up that they're going to go through. And I just felt like, you know what, I need to share my story because I can help people. And my world now is, and of course, I've always been very extroverted, and I've been a speaker at conferences and things, you know, all these things affiliated with business. But now I take those skills and I share and to help people um, about their grief and lay out all of these things that I've experienced. And you know what? Of all the people that I think that I have reached out to and helped, I think I've helped myself the most, because for the first time in my life since all this started, I am able to own this other side of my life that I've never talked about and integrate that into who I am to the world, to all the business people who know me. And guess what? I am an authentic person now, because I don't have to hide that part of me anymore. You know, I wrote the book, and when it came out, I was like, you know what? Just let the chips fall where they may. Whatever people think or say or do, it doesn't matter to me, because this is what I needed to do. This was my calling, and for me, it's all about sharing and helping people. That's really, for me now, what it's all about, and that's what I'm doing, and speaking and just, you know, trying to help people even in person. You know, I run into people all the time that I'll feel kind of drawn to them, and I'll tell them out of the blue about what happened to me in my story that I have. And this one man, for example, who owned a ski shop here, I mentioned to him about that, and he just looked at me like I'd hit him or something. And he said, I can't believe you have walked into my shop. He said, I just lost my daughter a year ago. She was 22 years old and killed in a car accident. And he just got tears in his eyes. And here I was sharing with him about the loss of my brother. That happens all the time. You know, I'll feel drawn to someone or compelled to say something. Again, for me, that's just what it's all about. And now I have time to focus on that, because I'm not, you know, splitting my time being a business person all the time. But it's been profoundly rewarding and has greatly expanded my whole realm. I was a speaker last year for the International Association for Near-Death Studies conference with Dr. Holden, who wrote the afterword. And that was just huge for me. And actually, the first year I moved here, my book was just getting ready to come out, and I went to a conference that was here in Colorado. And that was the first time I'd ever gone to a conference where people had badges on that said experiencer. And they provided a special room that was called the Experiencers Lounge. And people could go in there between, you know, breaks and sessions, whatever. And they could sit in there and they could share with each other their experiences. I felt absolutely giddy that day, because I had never been in a situation where I could share with people like that. It was amazing.
That's awesome. I look forward to those days where we could share openly in person. This is why we got to do it on the internet. There's a lot of people listening right now, and people have a lot of things in common. And just for people knowing that they're not alone, you know, and that they can talk about this stuff. I mean, that's kind of one of the things that people got to deal with. It's like, I'm the only one that feels this way. I'm the only one that's ever seen this, or whatever the case is. And you got to start talking about it, because you feel like there's no one you can talk to, and then you get depressed and all of that kind of stuff. So, again, like you're saying, like, of all of the work that you're doing, you're the one who's benefiting from it the most, because you're essentially, you can identify a need. You see a need and you feel it. So like the you that you were when you were going through that stuff, now you're the person speaking to other people going through similar situations. When someone has the loss of a loved one, look, let me show up and let you know what's going to happen, and that it's okay. Why? Because I needed someone to do it for me. Right? We have these spiritual awakenings or whatever it is, these traumatic experiences, and we need somebody to talk to. So the spiritual community and, like, you know, empaths and healers, that's what their captivated by it. They need it. They want to be the person that they needed when they were younger. So many times I just get this fire within me and I just start speaking to my younger self, listening, because I know he's out there, and so many different faces and people and situations. But I'll just start talking to that person like, man, if I was there listening to me, be the you that you needed when you were younger. So I commend you on your work. Let people know where they can go to check out your book. So if people want to check it out, you've got a bunch of blogs and other interviews and all that kind of stuff on your website. But what's the best place to check out your work?
Well, mostly my book is not in bookstores, although it is at the Unity, the headquarters Unity bookstore. But you can get my book from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and Balboa Press, which is a division of Hay House. So you can get it online. And it is in hardback, paperback, and ebook. So it's available in all three formats. And I do have a website, and you can, click there and order it. And that's where my blog, there's a blog tab there. And the blog, I've got already some of my interviews posted there, not all of them. I need to do an update. The website has a little bit of a strange address. It's Paula Lenz .wixsite.com/Paula Lenz. But maybe you can put that on your site.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that, and you definitely gotta let us know whenever you get the mist material ready too. So we can explore that. That'd be awesome. A teaching or whatever you have set up, a webinar. I'd love to participate in that. It sounds awesome.
Great. Yes. Well, and again, I've just started with notes, and here's a wild thing about that though. A friend of mine texted me from Houston, and she said, I just had a dream last night, and it was your voice, only it was like godlike, and it came through and it said, you are going to be teaching and instructing people again. And she said it was your voice. And she said, I'm calling to tell you this. I'm like, wow. Man, that is wild. So I think that is a definite sign I need to get this done and get into that, helping people in that regard too.
Heck yeah. Well, I really enjoyed our conversation, and we'll have to do it again, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yes, great. Thank you. Really great.
All right, Paula, thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks.
All right, bye-bye. Paula Lenz, everyone. Enjoyed the discussion. Bunch of good pointers there, man. You start seeing, like I'm reading the chat here, Chris Garner says, the more of these stories that we get out, the more we chip away the fear of the unseen and the taboos. Yeah, it's easy to fall into having it all figured out. It's easy to fall into shying away. But again, I have to look at even what I do with this podcast. It's like, I've said it a million times. Everybody has a piece of the puzzle. You take your piece, bring it to the table, we'll put it down and see if it makes a picture. And I really do believe that everyone has something that they can offer, right? Everyone's got something you can take away from that story at least. So many good gems, so much beautiful stuff. And it's interesting too, what she mentioned, feeling that pain in her heart. She said she felt like she was having a heart attack. I know that sounds familiar to a lot of you guys who are familiar with my story and maybe even your own, of being able to feel spirit of heaviness and burdens on people and things like that. I remember, again, I've shared this story so many times, but driving to an event that we were doing some years ago, and on the way there, I started having chest pains. I was a young man at the time. I was probably 26, maybe 27, something like that. And I'm having these crazy chest pains. I feel like I'm having a heart attack, and I'm praying against it. I'm rebuking the devil and all this stuff. And it's just this heaviness, and it's scary, And I start praying, and I asked the Father, like, what is it? And he let me know that where I was going to be ministering to the brokenhearted. So to get ready, so to begin to pray and intercede for those people. And sure enough, there was a lot of teenage girls who had been through traumatic experiences and heartbreak and things like that, that we ended up ministering to that night. So it was a way for me to feel the infirmities of the people, to begin to intercede for them and know how to minister. And that's happened so many times with physical healings and different heavinesses we've been talking about, of different spirits that come into the room. You just feel it, man. You walk into a room and you're instantly depressed. I was joyous. Across the threshold, I'm depressed. What is it? Again, we always start rebuking the devil. Devil, I bind you in Jesus' name. Whatever the case is. But it's a spirit of heaviness, unclean spirit, whatever it may be. But just paying attention to your body, because you're fearfully and wonderfully made, and we can pick up on those things. We can sense those spirits that are around us. And so if you don't, man, it'll drive you mad. You got to figure it out what it is, and you got to learn to respond accordingly. I wanted to play this. A friend of mine sent me this recording yesterday, and many of you know that I had Freedom Joy on the podcast about 2 weeks ago. Really good interview. If you haven't heard it, make sure that you go check out that interview we did together. But we spoke about the power of music, sound, supernatural experiences and encounters. We also talked about glossolalia, or speaking in tongues, and the practice thereof. And I've talked about how I use it and how I'm still exploring the depths of it. And there's levels to it, and there's different voices and different tones that come through when you're speaking in tongues. Well, she sent me a recording of her singing in tongues, and I want to play that for you guys and just bless y'all with it, because I thought it was really good. So I'm going to play this recording really quick, just a little bit of it for you guys to check out. Let me never Wow. That's beautiful. I told her, look, put you some soft synth behind it. You've got a healing CD. It'd be awesome. I'd buy it. It's beautiful. That's awesome. She does that. I know, what's her name? Jenny from Christ Alignment. Those, they go to a lot of the spiritual and new age festivals, like the really big ones, and they get on stage with meditation music playing, and they just start singing in tongues and doing harmony, just speaking in tongues in their heavenly language, prophesying and releasing things in the spirit as they're doing that. So shout out to Freedom Joy for sending me that. Man, I remember the first time I heard someone speak, not speaking, but singing in tongues years ago when I got born again. Man, it had to be 1998 at a church meeting. I think I remember we was at a concert somewhere in Florida, and we got into some prayer after the concert. Two beautiful nights, two beautiful things about that night. I remember 1998 was the fact that it was the first time that someone prophesied over me. There was some random guy. I didn't know him. I think if he was a pastor or whatever at that church. But he asked if he can pray for me, and he prayed for me, and it was the first time he said something about my father and how Jesus wanted to be a father to me, and how, I grew up without a dad, and God's wanting to restore the years that were stolen, and of God being a father and Jesus being that fatherly figure. And I just broke and felt, man, deliverance, man, as he just proclaimed that, gave me a hug, and I just felt deliverance, man. It was so beautiful. And it blew my mind, because when we got in the car, we had a good drive home. I was telling the guy in the back seat, I was like, man, that guy's a prophet. That guy's a prophet. And the other guy was like, no, he's not a prophet. He just prophesied over you. We all can prophesy. I was like, no, man, that guy, he was right on. He read my mail, and that was what was so beautiful about it. And then also, it was the same night, the first time I heard a guy during prayer singing in tongues as well, which was really interesting. But man, good stuff. I really enjoyed this interview. Blessed to be able to continue to do this. Thank you, God, for holding the internet together, even though the screens all froze up, some weird stuff going on. Anyway, we're still going. It's good stuff. Thank you guys for all the support, like on every level. I've been going through some weird times dealing with this internet, man, and it's pretty discouraging. I've had to cancel several interviews, man, and so it's very discouraging, actually. But you roll with the punches. You got to make things happen. This is what we do. Again, man, make sure y'all check out the new guided meditation that I just released. The Father, God, Heavenly Father, Mother Earth, interactive guided meditation. You'll love it. You'll love it. It'll help you. It'll bless you. Do it to ground. It really it helps you ground spiritually. But I think if you had your feet on the ground when you were doing it, if you were outside and literally like just dug your feet in the dirt, would be amazing. I need to do it. I'm going to go listen to my own guided meditation. I mean, that's how I test them out. I record it. I get the download, and then I record it, and then I have to edit it, and then I have to listen to it to see, okay, is this immersive? Is this pulling me in? And I know what to expect because I wrote it. So it's got to have a little bit more element of surprise for the people who don't know what's coming or what the sounds are coming, the sound effects. And man, I put a lot into it. So if it can pull me in, I'm like, okay, it's good. Send it off. Let's go. That's how I do the music. When I do my music, I listen to it. If I'm happy with it, if I'm pleased, let's go. And then it just goes out and does what it's supposed to do. It blesses people. It helps people to create encounter, the power of the mind, the power of creative thought. And that's what all my stuff is about. Y'all already know that. Ain't nothing new. So, yeah, check that out. All that stuff. Patreon, all the supporters. Man, thank you guys so much. It means the world to me. We've got some bigger moves coming up, testing some waters out, and I'm going to need your support. No matter what level of giving that you're able to do, man, everything helps. Any little bit. So patreon.com/TruthSeekah. We have the ability to reach a lot more people, and I'm probably gonna take that route and just test the waters, not locking into anything. We're gonna test the waters, but I need your help, man. Patreon.com/TruthSeekah. Thank you guys. Love y'all. Peace and shalom. We'll do it again soon.